Retro.
Are you an aspiring Jedi, or do you dabble with the dark side of the Force?
Regardless of whether you fancy yourself a defender of the light or an aspiring Sith Lord, you're going to need a lightsaber.
Podcast Stardust is pleased to partner with Saber Masters, the creators of high-quality, durable, and affordable lightsabers.
Saber Masters is preparing to launch the Ultimate Lightsaber 2.0, and right now you can get 2 for the price of 1.
So, check out the link in our show notes and go get your Ultimate Lightsabers from Saber Masters.
And don't forget to use our referral code Stardust to save $10 at checkout.
And each purchase using our referral code helps support Podcast Stardust.
Hello and welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithley.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
And we are going to be doing something a little different. We're talking about a Star Wars comic, which we've done before, but this one is a tie-in to Star Wars Visions, which was that anthology series that came out a couple years ago from all those anime studios. And this one is called Star Wars Visions Takashi Okazaki #1. He is the writer and artist. And it was published by Marvel Comics. But before we get into that discussion, Jay, remind everybody where we can be found around the internet.
Absolutely. We are conveniently found on Facebook, Instagram, and X at Podcast Stardust.
All right. The dish is aligned. The signal is boosted to maximum output. The shield is down. We're now broadcasting to the galaxy. So, as I was just saying, we're talking about Star Wars Visions Takashi Okazaki #1. It's called The Ronin and the Droid. This came out about a month ago, and Jay, you and I decided we wanted to discuss this because we saw the story on StarWars.com. We talked a little bit about it in the news, and we were just, big fans of that episode of Visions, and this promised to be a prequel of sorts about how the Ronin ended up pairing up with his droid partner there. What did you think about this issue overall?
Well, springboarding off of your introduction there, I love me a good backstory. So as soon as we had started discussing this in the news, not only did I want to know more, because as you mentioned, we just loved that original episode of The Ronin and how that all kind of came about. And just looking at the previews of this with the artwork and the way that things were being presented and how they related to the original Visions episode that we were treated to, I was all in. And I will say in a nutshell, this comic was beautifully mesmerizing. And there's a simplicity to the story that I really appreciated, because when I was done with it, I thought to myself, gosh, there's really not a whole lot to discuss. I mean, there is, but there's not, but yet oh my gosh, there really is. The more that I thought about it, and I really kind of delved into the details of kind of almost reading between the lines is what you had to do, because there really wasn't a whole lot of dialogue in this. It was told more from the aspect of a picture being worth 1,000 words, and just this kind of bouncing back and forth between timelines and the way that it was set up. But I found myself just getting lost in the panels of the artwork. It was so beautiful.
Yeah. To that note there, I read this digitally. Did you do digitally or did you get a physical copy?
I did digital. Yeah.
Yeah. And on my computer screen, I ended up having to go to the guided view that was panel by panel just because my screen wasn't big enough to get, and since it was all black and white and it is very much that manga sketch type art,
Yes,
it could be a little disorienting trying to look at that because it didn't quite have the traditional American comic book flow, flow that American comics do from panel to panel. And they go in order, that's fine, but it's very much a Japanese art style and it's beautiful. But it was kind of getting difficult for me to make out some of the details until I switched onto that guided view. I'd like to have had a physical copy of this and be able to look at it in my hand because that would have been easy as well. But yeah, some really really amazing panels. The bulk or the key event in this story is this duel between the Ronin and this other Sith. They both of them are Sith. They have red lightsabers. Now, the thing we learned in the novel that Emma Mako Camden wrote, The Ronin, was that the Sith were not so much dark side force users, which they kind of were, as they were really a splinter group of Jedi that were out for their own independence. And
Mhm.
so, and the Jedi were kind of the samurai and shogun of the empire. And in this case, you've got this the Sith whose name is Okina. That's how I was pronouncing it, but I'm not Japanese and I don't speak Japanese. I don't know if that's actually the right way. How are you pronouncing his name?
Okina.
Okina. Okay, we'll go with Okina. I like that better. It's frequently called Okina-san, but he is this. We come to find out he's this sword saint, and he is living in this village of mixed species. There's Sulistan, there's Ewoks, there's other characters around there, and they just kind of have this community. But over a 10-year period of time, they either die or all leave, and he's the only one that's left. And it's him and this droid, this R5 unit that he fished out of the water one
Mhm.
day, fixed up, and he calls him boy. And so it's a little unclear why at the beginning of the comic the Ronin shows up and challenges him to a duel. But before we get into that, what did you think about Okina and boy?
Well, it was a very peculiar relationship, and as you pointed out with the origin of the Sith in this particular version of Star Wars in being the splinter group, is that they weren't inherently evil per se, and you really do get that sense with Okina that he was really just trying, as Jenko would say, simple man trying to make his way in the universe. And I just loved the relationship from the get-go between Okina and this R5 that, as you pointed out, he calls boy. And R5 just he all he wants is a new leg. And
Mm-hmm.
Okina keeps promising this to him. And it's not until, very much later on that he's reminded of that promise. And they just really strike up this relationship of, almost like a father and a son, and you get to see R5 sporting Okina's hat eventually, the straw hat. And then just and the but the way that it goes back and forth between then and now and the present and the past, I think was really brilliant in terms of keeping you on your toes with the storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you were pointing out all the different alien species and things that were drawn into this comic, that was one thing I really appreciated about it was the fact that even though this was a departure from Star Wars, it was still Star Wars. And it leaned heavily into those origins of the samurai and the Kurosawa and that type of thing, and then brought in those elements, as you mentioned, of manga and some of the sketching, the Japanese style of sketching, but yet you still felt that inherent feeling that it was actually Star Wars. So I know I kind of veered off of your question there, but overall, the relationship between the two of them was very sweet.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely was. And the other thing about this village that they're in. Okay, so I'm trying to decide. They don't. I don't think they name the planet that they're on in this
I
entire
don't
time.
recall. No.
But the episode starts with a different astromech and what looks to be some sort of a protocol droid,
Yes.
at least from the front. But like if you look at it from behind, it looks like the person has hair. So is it a person wearing a droid armor? I don't know. But it's not C3PO. It looks like the protocol droid that was sitting in the sandcrawler that is just kind of bobbing around in there as
Mhm.
well. And they're walking through the desert, much like you would expect at R2 and C3PO to on Tatooine at the beginning of A New Hope. And then we see them again at the end of the episode, the end of the issue. And we'll get to them in a minute. And then there's twin suns on this planet. So my first thought when I started reading this comic was that they were on Tatooine. But then, there's this action going on the cliffside right behind them that they don't notice at all. And it ends with the Ronin and Okina kind of like flying down the side of the cliff and landing on a beach and getting into the water.
Mhm.
And it's like, well, there are no rivers or oceans on Tatooine. So where are we? It's ultimately not important. But I'm wondering if this was just not supposed to be a Japanese take on Tatooine for the purposes of the story.
It could be, and there's other binary systems out there, but Tatooine at one time did have water.
Right.
So, maybe this is supposed to be kind of somewhat set way, 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 way back,
Yeah.
And to your point with the protocol droid at the very beginning, I mean, for me, that was an obvious homage to R2 and 3PO, even though the protocol droid didn't look like 3PO. I mean, R5 is an astromech, but doesn't really look like R2 either. But I
Yeah.
think, and we see the two of them, and R5 is wearing that straw hat. And so I think that that's perhaps what this other protocol droid kind of maybe had some pseudo straw or something covering the head part of it as well. But there was a lot of really confusing head things going on in this comic, I will say, with with like
Hmm.
Okinawa, for example. And like I don't know if he was wearing a headpiece or if they were like horns or what. And eventually we get to see what he is, but that's we'll talk about that in just a second. But there you go.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the introduction to this really threw me because I'm still trying to figure out why they're in this comic. I mean, I understand the homage angle that you were talking about here, but they have no impact on the story whatsoever.
Hmm.
And in some ways, R2D2 and C3PO were like stand-ins for Guildenstern and what's the other character's name from Shakespeare, in the movies, and so they kind of fulfilling that role. They may be on a mission to deliver a message here, but they're looking for a village, and this protocol droid is complaining about what a horrible planet. Do you really think there's a village this way? Which is kind of the argument R2D2 and C3PO are having. It's like you go that way, you'll be malfunctioning a day, you miss out on scrap pile, and
Hmm.
and so there's don't catch me, let me catch you, follow me, because begging for help because you won't get it. And they don't quite get into that argument here, but they are kind of bickering, and like you said, it is an homage to them, even though it's not an arch unit, not a C3PO protocol droid type there as well. But the other thing is, this village that we're talking about, it sits on the side, or this beach that's kind of at the base of this cliff, and a whole lot of it is made out of the remains of all kinds of starships and TIE fighters, and part of an ATST. It kind of gives you the feeling that these are people who all got stranded here
Yeah.
from some sort of a crash, and then they built this community up. And you got this, I don't know what the tree is. It looks like an overgrown bonsai tree that features a lot in the different panels of this story as well. And this whole community grows up until one day Okina has this dream that he does not understand. You and I would probably just call it a force vision, where he sees Boy with Ronan, and Boy's happy and he's got his new leg. And it's not until the Ronin shows up and changes into a duel that he understands what he saw.
Hmm.
And so that gets us into this duel. And I was trying to figure out what this was all about until there was this discussion of Ronin calls Okina a sword saint, and that jogged something in my memory, so I looked it up. And I am no Japanese historian, and I don't have a firm grasp on Japanese culture or Japanese history, so I'm only giving a very high level description of what I found. But in the age of samurai and the like, there would be what is called a kinsei, or kinsei, which is a sword saint, and there could only be one of this. It's not an official title, but it is just kind of an acknowledgement of the supreme swordsman of the land. And I want to say the most famous one, his name was something like Miramakota or something like that. He like successfully fought 60 duels. And that seems to be what the Ronin was after, which was to put his skills to the test and challenge this guy. And so Okina acknowledges this, that this is the way of the sword. When you have this reputation, you can't turn down these challenges here. But what did you make of all that?
Yeah, I at first I will admit I was a little confused as to what this whole thing it was like all of a sudden like, okay, let's fight, kind of thing.
Mhm.
Like, where did this come from? And what is the precipice for this? And, and why is this happening? But then, as you were explaining it just now, it's more of an honorific kind of a thing than anything else. And, as you're talking about this and the way of the sword, and all I can think of is this is the way,
Mhm.
and then this is the way of the sword. But, I think it just kind of boils down to this is a traditional type of passing of the torch in a way. And so this was just the way that the way that it needed to be done in order to be able to, also have R5 pass into the hands of the Ronin.
Yeah, and so let's think about this story and this aspect of it in the larger universe of storytelling involving these characters. So we had the duel episode of Visions in that anthology. It was the first one that came out there. And the Ronin shows up in this village right when this Imperial warlord attacks it. And then you had the other Sith character that the Ronin goes out and challenges and fights. I don't want to say a similar duel, but it involves similar elements. Like if there's a log, they're on a river, and they go over a waterfall, and he ends up finding some sort of a shrine that he puts one of his
Oh
sabers
yeah.
in and then sneaks up
Mhm.
behind her and gets her. And at the end of that, he takes the kyber crystal out of her blade and puts it with a whole bunch of others he found. And so there's something to him wandering around the land and as the Ronin, like tracking down these Sith or former Sith and defeating them and kind of putting into that. The explanation in the novel Ronin that we talked about, Emma Miyako Candon wrote, was that he was this military leader and led all of these Sith on a disastrous mission to get their freedom, and now he's kind of wrapping things up by putting them all out of their misery. I'm starting to sense a bit of a disconnect. I feel like this comic ties in much better to the duel than the Ronin novel ties into either one of these stories. But what are your
Mm.
feelings on it?
I'll be honest, there was a lot of the details of the novel that have escaped my brain pan since we have reviewed it, because that's,
Hmm.
gosh, been what, 2 years, 3 years
At
at this
least two,
point?
yeah. Hmm.
And, so honestly, I would really have to go back and refresh my memory. I mean, I remember some of the broad strokes, but and as you're talking about this, I can see where you're going with that disconnect, though.
Yeah. And the other thing is that I could see this being animated and turned into one of the episodes of the Visions anthology
Oh, yeah, for
very
sure.
easily. And this would fit into that 20-minute time frame
Mhm.
easily. And it's other than what I was describing within like kind of traversing the panels and needing to go into that guided view here, I feel like it is a much easier follow than the novel was, because for all the action that the novel had, there was a lot of stuff that you were trying to understand on some other introspective, I'm terribly explain this level, that it was just hard to follow what was going on there. That was not always clear to me. And it kind of makes me think that maybe the story of the Ronin is better left for a pictorial art, whether it is a manga, a comic, or an animated episode. What do you think?
Mhm. No, I totally agree with you, and just the way that it's very visual, and,
Hmm.
as I was saying at the outset here, there wasn't really a whole lot of dialogue anyway, and the visualization of it is what tells the story, quite honestly.
Yeah, yeah. So, what did you think of the duel that they ended up in?
I thought it was really awesome. And,
Hmm.
just the way that the panels were, as you said, a little bit different than your normal, and some of them were more vertical with the 3. The one that really stood out in my mind was there was, like, 3 almost like wedge shapes that were showing different parts of the duel itself, and, once again, it was like a dance, and it was really interesting how the it was, like, almost like a mask of Okina-san, and
Hmm.
then, like, you see that he's actually a Zabrak. Because I was trying to figure out, is he Deveronian? Is he, like, what is he? Because that's
Hmm.
what I was saying about the confusing headdress thing going on too, but I thought it was awesome. What'd you think?
Yeah, it was hard to tell like what was the mask and what was the horns and those
Right,
type of things
yeah.
until the mask broke. This reminded me a bit of the what was the name of the episode where Obi-Wan fought Darth Maul in Rebels? Um,
Oh, Twin Sons?
yeah,
Yes.
and that, it was no, there was more moves in this than there was in that fight, but there wasn't as many in this fight as there was between Obi-Wan, Qui-Gon, and Darth Maul in the Phantom Menace. And so
Mhm.
similar type of a thing. And Dave Filoni talked about the fight between Obi-Wan and Maul in that episode of Rebels, that these are masters, and it pays homage to a lot of these fights from various samurai movies where the fight was won in a couple moves. It was,
Right.
which one of the masters figured out the right tactic from the get-go. And so, when the Ronin lands in the water, he's got to come up with a quick strategy. And so he uses his saber, it looks like, to generate some steam, which kind of shrouds his where he is and what he's going to do from Okina, who comes at him, and then Ronan gets him with that one cut. And the response to that is, "Well done, young one. This is how a Sith living by the way of the sword ends. Never forget this." And then his final words are, "Stay well, boy," to his droid. And so, there's no animosity there. He's living
No.
by this way, this lifestyle here, which is, he's this acknowledged master. He's been tracked down, and he realizes, he's gonna put this young one through the paces, but he realizes that, this is it. This is how this is what you have to expect. At some point, you don't get to die quietly in your bed. It's, you know,
Mhm.
you're going to be tracked down by someone who wants to challenge you and see how they measure up. And when that's all said and done, the Ronin drags his body to shore and gives him a respectful, well, not a burial, but a funeral pyre.
Right.
And he's very respectful of his body and his remains.
Exactly. Just as he would do for any, co-warrior, he did for
Mhm.
his foe. And Okina-san saw all of this kind of in a vision anyways.
Mhm.
And, as you were saying, he wasn't going to just pass quietly in his bed at night. He wouldn't have wanted it any other way. And so for him, it was, this is the natural progression of things, and this is the way that it needs to be. And so he was completely fine with the way that things ended up happening.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and, then because we get the end and the funeral pyre, and then we get how they met each other before they started their duel. And that was the Ronin walking up to him, says, "You must be one of the four sword saints, Master Okina, the one who shatters the galaxy with nothing but a name. I would like to challenge you to a duel." It's it's like,
Mhm.
"Hey, how you doing? I'm Joe. Let's fight." It's, and I just really like that. And then, what the whole thing is, when it ends, the Ronin looks over at Boy and just says, "Yeah, hey, you coming?" And hands him the hat, and the boy follows
Yeah.
him. It's just kind of there's no animosity, no desire for revenge and stuff like that. And now, I mean, this this is not a acceptable cultural thing to do here at all, and not in Japan anymore either, as far as I know. You can just challenge someone to a duel to the death, and everyone's good with the result. But still, I just found this story very endearing.
Mhm.
Uh, I liked it quite a bit. This is, you're the one that suggested that we do this after we talked about it on the news. And I was like, "Oh, okay," but I'm really glad you did, because I could take a whole lot more stories about Ronan and his adventures and this type of thing if they were all like this.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And the way that it's presented is just so, so good. And to your point just a minute ago when you're saying like people just don't do this anymore. I mean, it's the same thing even just with like medieval knights.
Mhm.
Nobody jousts anymore either, but the stories are still endearing. And I just love how, R5, like you said, is just like, oh, okay, here's my new master. Because he understands that this is the way of things as well, just from being around, Okina,
Yeah.
which is kind
Yeah.
of cool.
Yeah, it's a fun story. I'm
Yeah.
really glad that we read that. I highly recommend it to anybody. I mean,
Definitely,
if you're
it's
gonna get hung
beautiful.
up on whether or not this is canon, then it's not gonna be for you. But
Right.
if you can look for a fun Star Wars inspired story as seen through the lens of a different culture, then this should be right up your alley, and it's really enjoyable. So
Well said.
go check it out. All right,
Mhm.
any other thing about this you want to discuss before we wrap it up?
I think I'm good. Yeah, I think we hit all of the points here. It's just and again, as you said, I would highly recommend it as well.
Mhm. Well, we'll definitely have to do some more Star Wars comics soon. It's always fun when we get a chance to dive into a story like this, especially when we don't
Oh,
have to
yeah,
go through like 10, 20 issues to get everything right.
exactly.
So, all right. Well, then, thanks for joining us for our discussion of Star Wars Visions Takashi Okazaki #1 here on Podcast Stardust. We hope you've enjoyed it. And if you did, and you haven't done so already, please subscribe to Podcast Stardust on your podcatcher of choice. I'd like to remind you that you can find all episodes of the podcast over at retrozap.com, which is the home to the RetroZap Podcast Network, which features other shows like Enjoy Stuff, Enemy Cast, Superhero Suite, Love, Death, and Robots Plus, and some other shows as well. Doomcast recently came back and they were discussing Doom 2, so make sure you head over there and check that out. As always, we are super appreciative when you take the time to leave a rating, review, like, follow, whatever the case may be on your podcatcher of choice. That helps the others find the show when the algorithm picks up on those type of things. And the other great thing you can do to help us out is to spread the show by word of mouth. Social media is great for that. Share a favorite episode, share the links to the show, discuss it with your friends. That means a lot to us. And hey, comment on our YouTube page, and Jay will tell you about all the places you can find in just a second. So yeah, we got a lot coming up. Jay, remind everybody what our contacts are so they can find everything that we're doing.
Yes, and we do continue to grow, and we thank each and every one of you for that because it's been a pleasure to see all of the places that Podcast Artist actually shows up. So you can connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, now X at Podcast Artist. And if you want to check out just some fun boards over on Pinterest, we do have a whole lot of things going on over there. And as Dennis was just saying, we do have two different YouTube outlets. So we have the regular YouTube channel as well as the YouTube music channel, where you can like, subscribe, leave some comments, interact with us, and then also share that stuff out on social media as well. So, as Dennis was also mentioning with RetroZap, we have a Discord room on the RetroZap Discord server. So, we are just one of many different rooms over there. So, if you want to check that out, just head to the link in our show notes and you can do that, as well as checking out our TeePublic store. And we have 7 different show logo designs available on all kinds of different products. So, if you'd like to pick something up and you need a wardrobe refresh or a new lifestyle product in your life, you can head over to that link in our show notes as well. And speaking of sabers, you can get a red saber, a purple saber, a green saber. Actually, it's all in one saber from Saber Masters. So you can pick up 2 for 1 right now on the dual on the deal that Saber Masters is having, and you can get those for $199 and 2 for 1 is going on. And all you have to do is just head to sabermasters.com, and if you do pick up anything as you add to cart, make sure you add the code Stardust to that as well, and you will get an additional $10 off. So the link for that will also be in our show notes, or like I said, you can go directly to sabermasters.com. So, with that, Dennis, why don't you fill everybody in on what you got going on with your other podcast?
Sure. So my wife Beth and I are talking about Star Trek over on Warp Trails, which is exclusive to the RexZap podcast feed. Right now, we are covering the 5th and final season of Discovery and having a good time doing so. If you want to catch our thoughts on previous seasons of Discovery, Lower Decks, Picard, or Strange New Worlds, the best place to do that is retrozap.com. Just look for the Warp Trails page, and all previous 113 episodes or so are there.
Nice.
Jay, what is the lay of the land when it comes to cosplay?
All right. Well, as usual, you can catch all of my adventures and everything I'm up to over on my Instagram, which is at j.snipscosplay. And you can catch me as all kinds of things from Ahsoka to the Fourth Sister, 2 different versions of Hera, and my original concept Mandalorian that I'm having a ton of fun with. So I just wrapped up a few different appearances here between the month of April and also early May with May the 4th. And so I will keep everybody up to date on some of the other things that I've got coming up as well. But until then, just having tons of fun interacting with a bunch of different people over on Instagram. So again, you can check that out at j.snipscosplay.
All right. Upcoming on the show this Friday, it's bittersweet. We're getting the final episode for season 5 and the series of The Bad Batch, and we'll be discussing it then. And then on Monday, it'll be time for our weekly look at Star Wars news. So, with that, thanks for listening to episode 723 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great rest of your week, and until next time, may the Force be